Hi YouTube, welcome back to my channel, True Crime Revealed. Today's story involves murdered minor, 6-year-old beauty queen, JonBenét Ramsey. The JonBenét Ramsey murder is perhaps one of the most famous and publicized cases of our time. She was found murdered, strangled to death in the basement of her Boulder, Colorado home on December 26, 1996. Today we're going to discuss the events that led up to the murder itself, as well as the findings after the murder took place. If you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get started.
Hello everyone, welcome back to True Crime Revealed. Today we are going to be doing the story of the JonBenét Ramsey murder. If you lived through the 90s or even beyond, you most likely have seen this face and have heard the story about the JonBenét Ramsey murder. It is an unsolved case, one that people are still talking about today, and many cannot believe it has not been solved. So I said, hey, I think this would be a really good one to do for my channel here on True Crime Revealed. So let's get started. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. Her name is a combination of her parents, JonBenét Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey. Her first name, JonBenét, is for the French variation of her father's name, JonBenét, and her middle name, Patricia, for her mother, Patsy. She has siblings Burke Ramsey, who was about 3 years older, and 3 half-siblings, Elizabeth, John, and Melinda, who are children from John's prior marriage. JonBenét's father, John, was a businessman, and he was actually the president of Access Graphics, which was a computer software company, and it has been later known as Lockheed Martin. John met Patsy, and the two of them fell madly in love and got married in 1980. Now, Patsy was a former beauty queen herself, and she was actually a former Miss West Virginia. So it's no surprise that when she had her little girl, JonBenét, she decided to put her in pageants so that she could experience the same thing that she did. So JonBenét was a full-on pageant little queen, and we're going to talk about some of her winnings, and I'm going to show you lots of awesome pictures and some clips, but first we got to see where it started off first with, and that would be Patsy, who won Miss West Virginia. So now I'm going to play a short clip of Patsy during her reign as Miss West Virginia.
Had entered beauty contest.
Yes. I'm a junior at West Virginia University.
So this was, what, fun for you both to have her do this?
It was the most wonderful time of my life.
So pageantry was definitely one of Patsy's pastimes, and as you heard in the clip, she said it was the most wonderful time of her life, and it's something that she really enjoyed doing with JonBenét and bonded over. Now, the Ramseys spent a lot of time in Atlanta, Georgia, but they also had a second home in Boulder, Colorado, where the murder will eventually take place. JonBenét attended High Peaks Elementary School in Boulder, and she was described as being a very smart little girl who excelled in math. So not only was she this gorgeous, stunning little girl, she was very smart and did well in her academics, including math, which can sometimes be a challenging subject. She is also described as loving to read, and she would draw happy, really pretty, bright colored pictures. So she had a very vibrant personality, but was also very artistic. Her teacher recalls that JonBenét would actually escort 6 students down to the nurse's office because she was so gentle with them. So she was just very beautiful little girl, but also on the inside, she was very kind, she was very loving, she was very joyful, and she just basically added that spunk and charisma and love with her family. Everyone that was around her said that she loved to smile. So she was just very, very sweet. JonBenét was described as being so full of life and energetic. She was always on the go, just like her mom. And her dad, a lot of times, would have to tell her to slow down because she would be so excited to do sports. And she would sometimes almost hurt herself because she was just moving so quickly. She loved hula hooping. She loved rollerblading. She loved being outside. She loved roses. She loved dogs and cats. She definitely loved the color pink. Of course, she's a little beauty queen and she's super girly. And she would actually go in her backyard in the summertime and actually search for fairies. So just your average little girl that just loves everything girly, everything pink, and she just had a lot of big dreams. She was also stated to be a natural performer, and of course she was a model and she would do lots of child beauty pageants, but she would actually just put on little shows for her family. They would sit together in the kitchen and she would put together shows for her family, and they enjoyed watching her just because not only was she adorable, but she was so entertaining as well. At just the young age of 4, 5, and 6 years old, JonBenét knew that she wanted to be successful. If you asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, like any other kid her age, she would go ahead and say like a list of things. So she would say she wanted to be a doctor, a vet, or even an Olympic ice skater, which I think is really cool because the Olympics were always my favorite sport to watch, specifically the Winter Olympics and ice skating. So I thought that was really cool that she was actually an ice skater. She liked doing ice skating, which is not easy. JonBenét had a sweet little white dog that she loved so much, and the two of them were like two peas in a pod. They would actually run around the back of their house together. They would jump in leaf piles together. So she was very, very close with the family dog, and she enjoyed making art and little keepsakes for her mother, like this adorable handprint here that she made in 1994 for Mother's Day. So JonBenét was the perfect mix of both brains and beauty, and she loved performing. And during one little show that JonBenét was doing, her mother saw how into it she got for the particular show, and she said, "Hey, let me go ahead and start putting her into pageants." JonBenét was a natural born performer. She was also a child model, and her mom put her in the cutest outfits. She was absolutely adorable. She loved to sing, she loved to dance, she loved to be on the stage, and she won a ton of different pageants in the early 90s. So, JonBenét was participating in pageants pre toddlers and tiaras days, and pageants were really big in the late 80s and early 90s, and they were pretty classy. And even though there were media reports that Patsy was a quote unquote pageant mom doing that type of behavior, there was never anything really crazy going on like the toddler and tiara eras of the late 2000s. JonBenét was entered and won several child beauty pageants in Boulder, Colorado. Some of the titles that she won were America's Royal Miss, Little Miss Charlevoix, Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. So JonBenét was well on her way. She was quite the little fashionista. She enjoyed singing and dancing, and she was winning pageants left and right, and was just a successful little 6-year-old who had the whole world ahead of her. Her family was shocked at the events that happened on December 26th, 1996. The morning of Christmas, December 25th, 1996, was no different than other Christmases had been at the Ramsey house. JonBenét and Burke woke up super excited to see all of the different gifts that they had underneath the tree, and they could not wait to open them up. Burke recounts in a recent interview that they both had bikes under the tree. JonBenét had a doll set, and it's the mid-90s and it's Christmas, so they are so excited. So the day of Christmas, the house is gorgeous. Patsy made sure that the house was beautiful. It had the works of all of the Christmas decorations. I'm sure it smelled like Christmas. It was just the perfect home in Colorado that they lived in. And they had an awesome day celebrating Christmas together as a family. When night comes on Christmas of 96 is where things get a bit sticky. And the morning of December 26th, 1996, it is discovered that JonBenét is actually missing from her bed. So the Ramseys go into JonBenét's room and they are distraught because it is the day after Christmas and JonBenét should be in there. She is not with a family or a friend. She didn't go over anyone's house. She went to sleep in that house and she should be in her bed. And her parents are very distraught when they see that she is not there. And so they go downstairs to try to call the police and see what's going on. And this is when they discover that there is a ransom note in the home. Now, the ransom note was very long, and investigators thought that this was a bit odd because ransom notes typically are supposed to be written pretty quickly, and even though they're making their demands, they're not quite as specific as this particular ransom note was. So keep in mind, John was a part of a specific organization that he worked for. He made a lot of money. So they were actually demanding $118,000 in this particular note. The letter reads, Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attached to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier delivery pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement, countermeasures, and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You're not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It's up to you, John, now. Victory. SBTC. So things start to get sticky with the ransom note and investigators because number one, it's lengthy. Number two, the ransom note only had Patsy's fingerprints on it, as well as the authorities who handled it. So they thought that that was a bit suspicious as to why there were no other fingerprints on it except for Patsy's, who quote unquote discovered it, and of course the authorities who were also investigating it. While I understand that investigators thought it was a bit suspicious that only Patsy's fingerprints and the authorities were on there, The kidnappers, if there was one, could have been wearing gloves when they handled the paper. So that's one theory. But also, the main theory that investigators surfaced was that Patsy possibly was the culprit of the letter because there were a lot of similarities in her handwriting to the actual letter as well. So that is something that the Ramseys had to live with under guilt for several years. So at the Ramsey home, the day after Christmas in 1996, it should be a day filled with laughter, fun, the kids outside riding their new bikes, having a great time on the day after Christmas. Instead, the Ramseys are frantic, beside themselves, trying to figure out where their 6-year-old daughter has gone. Now, they have to call 911, and they actually phoned the police at 5:52 a.m. on December 26. It is stated that the Ramsey parents are the only ones known to be in the house the night of JonBenét's death, her immediate family. So just Patsy, John, and of course their son, Burke. They're the only ones that are in there. So police actually arrive at the home within 3 minutes of Patsy calling the police, and they actually go ahead and they search the home, and they don't find any sign of forced entry. So that's another really sticky situation, is whoever this murderer was already in the house the night of Christmas, and whether it was a family member, a lot of speculation points toward the parents, of course, because they were there the night of the murder. Her brother, of course, some people think that as well. But it also could have been someone that knew how to get into the home and maybe snuck out while the Ramseys were out, waited until that night to go ahead and kill poor JonBenét. So whatever the situation is, the police decide that there was no forced entry in the home. Initially, when the officers are called to the house that morning, one of the officers actually went in the basement, and he was trying to discover if there was an escape route for the kidnapper to leave, and he decided that there was not an escape route. So JonBenét's body was actually down in the basement that entire time, but he did not realize it simply because he did not open the door, and he stated he was simply down there just to see if there was an escape route. So the day after Christmas, while investigators are at the home trying to check the home and see if they can figure out where JonBenét is, John actually makes arrangements to pay the ransom. He contacts his bank to try to get the $118,000 together so that he can pay these supposed kidnappers off. So at this point, JonBenét's body has still not been discovered, and her family, detectives, and police are actually very hopeful that she is still alive and that they will hopefully find her. And so the only room in the entire house that they actually tape off and they don't allow anyone to go in is JonBenét's bedroom, because they don't want to do any further contamination of evidence, and they want to make sure that if there is any evidence in the room, they're able to find it, seeing that this is the last known place where she was last alive. So they basically close off this particular room, but all other areas of the house are not closed off. But other family and friends who are visiting the Ramseys know that they are grieving, and so they try to help by cleaning up other parts of the house, and in doing so, they possibly have destroyed evidence that was there. So at about 1 p.m., there is a detective that comes to the house, and she asks John and one of the family friends to search the house to see if anything looks a bit weird or out of the ordinary. And what happens is they actually start their search in the basement, ironically, and John goes ahead and opens the door that the detective earlier had overlooked, and he actually finds JonBenét's body in one of the rooms. And JonBenét was actually covered with duct tape. She had a cord that was actually found around her wrist and her neck, and her torso was covered by a white blanket. And so John is very upset. He actually picks up his daughter's body and he takes it upstairs. And then basically, when JonBenét is moved, the crime scene again is further contaminated. Early on in the investigation, the Ramseys, both parents and the son Burke, had to provide different samples for DNA evidence. This included hair samples, blood samples, and even handwriting samples. And Burke Burke was actually interviewed within a month of them locating her dead body, and the parents were actually interviewed very early on as well. So they definitely wanted to rule the parents and the brother Burke out as suspects. Now, there were a lot of theories going on as to what could have possibly happened if Patsy or John had something to do with her murder. JonBenét was known to do a lot of bedwetting, so they're stating that they thought that Patsy, in a rage, may have had something to do with her murder in one of the bedwetting instances and accidentally maybe killed her daughter. So investigators kind of threw that idea out there, and here's an interview where Patsy is actually defending herself.
Police interrogators put the bedwetting theory to Patsy Ramsey.
How about the theory that this was an accident? JonBenét got up, or something happens, there's an accident, somebody...
You're going down the wrong path, buddy.
Okay, somebody accidentally, or somebody gets upset over bedwetting. That's one of the things that's been proposed. Okay.
Didn't happen. If she got up in the night and ran into somebody, it was somebody there that wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know what transpired after that, whether it was an accident, intentional, premeditated, or whatnot. But it was not one of her 3 family members that were also in that house. Period. End of statement.
The Boulder police were convinced she was lying. Despite this, and despite the grand jury verdict, the Boulder police maintained unrelenting pressure on the parents.
If I told you right now that we have trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of JonBenét, what would you tell me?
That is totally impossible. Go retest.
How is it impossible?
I did not kill my child. I didn't have a thing to do with it.
And I'm not talking, somebody's guess or some rumor or some story.
I don't care what you're talking about.
I'm talking about scientific evidence.
I don't give a flying flip how scientific it is. Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it. My life has been hell from that day forward. And I want nothing more than to find out who is responsible for this. Okay? I want to work with you, not against you. Okay? This child was the most precious thing in my life. And I can't stand the thought of thinking that somebody's out here walking on the street. God knows they might do it again to some other child. Quit screwing around asking me about things that are ridiculous, and let's find the person that did this.
So the Ramseys were very adamant that they had absolutely nothing to do with their daughter's death, and they weren't too happy with police because they felt that while police were quote unquote wasting time interviewing them, they could be out there finding whoever this supposed real killer was. Now, the autopsy actually revealed that JonBenét had actually been killed by strangulation, and she had a fracture to her skull. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxia by strangulation, and while there was no evidence of rape, they couldn't 100% rule out sexual assault. There was no semen found. However, they did find that there was trauma and vaginal injury to JonBenét, and that the vaginal area had actually been wiped clean with a cloth. So with all of these findings in the autopsy, investigators have no choice but to rule her death as a homicide. Now, there was actually a rope that was around her neck that had a cord with a broken handle of a paintbrush that was tied to it. And this device was actually determined to be what was used to strangle JonBenét to death. So police actually took this into evidence, and they determined that this was what was used to kill her. Now, what's really chilling is that a part of this paintbrush that was used as this contraption to strangle JonBenét, A part of it was actually found in a tub of Patsy's art supplies. Now, the bottom third of it was never found in the house after extensive searching. However, it's just another damning piece of evidence that investigators used against the Ramseys because they thought, was it really coincidence that they would find this? Yeah, someone could have snuck into the house and created it with those supplies, but it also doesn't look good that no one was found to do forced entry in the house, and a lot of the evidence is in the home that these people live in. Now, concerning her brother Burke, one of the main pieces of evidence that they found was a pineapple bowl that actually had Burke's fingerprints on the bowl. Now, during the autopsy, they actually found a fruit material in JonBenét's stomach that they thought was pineapple, and this would be something that JonBenét had eaten a few hours before her death. And there are actual photographs in the home that show that there was pineapple in a bowl on the kitchen table that had a spoon in it. Now, John and Patsy claim that they don't remember putting the bowl on the table or feeding it to JonBenét, but police report that her 9-year-old brother at the time, Burke's fingerprints were actually on the bowl. And the Ramseys stated that Burke was not a light sleeper at all, and he would actually sleep through the entire night, and he was not awoken until several hours later when the police arrived. So again, just more evidence that's found with this pineapple bowl is really crucial evidence that police feel that they found, because this is the last food that JonBenét has eaten that's in her stomach. And lo and behold, the only prints that are on the bowl are that of her brother. So a lot of people that have theories really believe that Burke possibly could have had something to do with this, and her parents basically cleaned up the evidence and lied, if you will, for Burke because they didn't want to lose both of their children, and that's another theory. In the early 2000s, forensic investigators were able to extract enough material from JonBenét's underwear that had a mixed blood sample, and they were able to establish a DNA profile. What they discovered is that the DNA actually belonged to an unknown male person, and it excluded the DNA of each of the Ramseys. They did go ahead and submit this to CODIS for the FBI for DNA, that database. However, the sample did not match any profile in that database. And later on in 2016, there was a report that a new forensic analysis with more sensitive techniques revealed that the original DNA from the genetic markers were from 2 individuals other than JonBenét. So this is just ongoing. Again, this is an unsolved case. They're still trying to test it with more and more advancements that are new in DNA technology. However, it still has not been solved. There are a couple of different theories involving the JonBenét Ramsey murder case. There's the family member theory and the intruder theory. With the family member theory, there are investigators and profilers that state there is a 12-to-1 probability that there was a family member or someone that took care of JonBenét who is involved in the homicide of a child. So that's why they so heavily think that it could have possibly been a family member, just because the odds are that high when children go missing or when they're murdered. In a lot of cases, the parents are the ones that are actually behind the death. The first theory was, of course, how Patsy hit JonBenét in a fit of rage after another bedwetting incident and then went ahead and strangled her. So that was one that they thought was possibly one, but after interviewing Burke, he stated that his mom didn't have uncontrollable rage. They never really got spanked, nothing like that. So there was really not a ton of evidence that pointed towards her going into this fit of rage with the bedwetting, but it's one theory that the police just did not let go for the longest. When Burke was interviewed by a child psychologist, they stated that he seemed very healthy and happy and that he didn't really have anything to do with this murder. So they never really considered Burke to be a suspect in the murder. John and Patsy Ramsey actually offered a $100,000 reward in the newspaper in 1997. So they were doing all that they could to work with police, offering rewards, doing all they could to get information about who could have possibly done this to their daughter. There was a grand jury in Colorado in 1999 that decided to indict the parents after all on 2 counts of child abuse, and they were basically suggesting that the parents knowingly and recklessly permitted and allowed a child to be placed in a situation that threatened her life. So they were indicted in 1999. The indictment was again just based on child abuse and neglect. In closing, we're going to discuss some of the potential suspects in this case, which will be the second theory, which was the intruder theory. The first intruder theory that we had was their neighbor, Bill McReynolds. He actually was the neighborhood Santa Claus, and they thought that he possibly could have had something to do with it. Bill McReynolds would attend a lot of Patsy's famous Christmas gatherings that she would have, and he would dress up as Santa Claus. He was basically the neighborhood Santa Claus for all of the kids. And some people feel that he maybe wanted a somewhat inappropriate relationship with JonBenét just because he wanted her to be his little special friend. He went as far as to getting a vial of glitter that the 6-year-old gave to him during heart surgery. He took it with him for like a good luck measure. And what was even a little bit more weird was that he asked his wife to actually mix the glitter with his ashes when he was to die. So this theory, a lot of people feel is a bit far-fetched, and they don't really think he had anything to do with it. So this theory is a little bit far-fetched, and a lot of people don't believe he had anything to do with it, but he was listed as one of the specific suspects. Another suspect for the intruder theory was Chris Wolf. Now, Chris Wolf was actually a local reporter, and his girlfriend at the time had reported him as a suspect in this case as well. In 2003, there actually was a defamation case against the Ramseys brought on by Wolf, but he was identified as an early suspect in this case as well. Another suspect in the intruder theory was Michael Helgoth, and Helgoth was actually an electrician, and he had actually worked at a nearby auto center. They actually referred to him as Hellraiser, and there was an alleged dispute involving the Ramseys, and they thought that he was going to be a potential suspect in this case. However, he committed suicide before they could even get to him, but he was definitely one of the suspects early on in this case as well. Another suspect at the time was 32-year-old Gary Olivia. He was a known sex offender in the Boulder area when JonBenét was found dead. And they actually found a cutout of JonBenét photo in his backpack, so that raised some eyebrows. He also had a high school friend that told police that shortly after the murder, he contacted him and said, "I heard a little girl, I heard a little girl." So they thought that he possibly had something to do with this. DNA eventually did clear him of the murder. However, they were able to nab him on possessing child pornography, and he was arrested. Another suspect in the case was the housekeeper that actually worked for the Ramseys. Her name was Linda Hoffman Pugh, and she actually had a key to the home, and her husband was a handyman, and his name was Mervyn. Now, during the investigation, she didn't really fit the profile of what investigators thought the murderer would be. White male, a former convict, someone between the ages of 25 to 30. So she didn't fit it at all, but she had a lot of access to the home and knew how to get around the house. The little girl, of course, JonBenét trusted her. So that's why they thought she could have possibly been a suspect, maybe tricked the little girl to go into the basement. And Patsy claimed that this woman, Linda, was actually desperate for money, so that it would make sense that she was actually trying to bribe them for money and kidnap the daughter, working with someone else who was helping her. Now, Linda actually voiced her opinions and her suspicions that Patsy actually killed JonBenét accidentally and that she was behind the murder. And in turn, Patsy was trying to place the finger on her that she was somehow behind the ransom note as well. Linda has never been formally charged for the crime because any evidence that they found on her was circumstantial at best, they stated. So she's never really been formally charged of the crime, but she does believe that Patsy has something to do with it. And the last suspect is John Mark Carr. He is a former school teacher, and in 2006, just out of the blue, he admits, quote unquote, that he is behind the murder of JonBenét. He did this demented confession through a series of diary entries that were just really, really weird. He states that it was a love game gone wrong and that he accidentally killed her. And there were all of these disturbing emails that showed that he had this sexual fascination with JonBenét. So a really sick and twisted guy. He was actually arrested in Thailand, where he was actually facing child pornography charges there. But it was deemed that it was actually a false confession, and he was pretty much just obsessed with JonBenét. As of 2016, investigators conclude that an unidentified male is actually the one that was responsible for JonBenét's death. So this case is still opened. It is one of the most famous cold cases of our time, but it's really sad because in the year of 2006, Patsy Ramsey died with a cloud of suspicion still hanging over her, and she died not knowing who was responsible for her daughter's death. JonBenét Ramsey was laid to rest on December 31st, 1996. She's actually buried at the St. James Episcopal Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia. She's actually laid to rest next to her mother, who died from ovarian cancer in 2006. And she's also laid next to her sister, Elizabeth Ramsey, who died in a car crash in 1992. So a lot of tragedy befall the Ramsey family, and the three of these family members are actually buried next to each other in Marietta, Georgia. And as sad as it is that Patsy never got to hear the justice about what happened to her daughter or cleared her name, it is nice to know that they are resting peacefully together after their deaths. John Ramsey has done a series of interviews after JonBenét's death and after his wife Patsy's death. He was even on Oprah, and in the interview, he states that Patsy would always carry around a blue dress because she was waiting for the day that they would find the real killer and her name would be cleared. And she said that she wanted blue specifically because blue looks the best on TV. Burke was actually interviewed recently on Dr. Phil, and it was a pretty bizarre interview. Just the way that he would answer some of the questions was a little weird, and after the interview, a lot of people who already thought that Burke may have had something to do with it just kind of confirmed their suspicions even more. I personally don't know if I believe that. That would be a pretty out there theory, but hey, you never know. And that is the story, guys, on the JonBenét Ramsey murder. I would love to hear in the comments your theories. Do you think that John and Patsy had something to do with it? Do you think that Burke had something to do with it? Do you believe that one of the suspects that we talked about earlier is in fact the murderer and maybe was wrongfully cleared? Really, really interesting stuff. I just hope that this case is solved very soon because it's sad that it's such a cold case and that we're no closer to finding what happened over 20 years ago. And I'm really hoping that we can get closer to finding who was responsible for taking this sweet little angel who had so much to offer the world and was definitely gone too soon. So that's the video, guys. If you like the video, please like, please comment, please share, please subscribe. Thank you to everyone for all of your positive comments, for liking, and for subscribing. If you have any stories that you would like for me to cover, I'm open to those suggestions as well. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.